Good afternoon, and welcome to the Transition Readiness series. My name is Patrick Shepard. We welcome you back to this third in our series of Transition Readiness broadcasts. Today, we're going to be discussing strategies for managing resources during the pre-election and post-election periods. We realize that this isn't the most substantive or exciting kind of work that we do as ethics officials, but it's nonetheless very, very important. And in many ways, the hardest part of preparing for disruptions in the work or increases in workload is making the time to plan and prepare. So today what we'd like to do is take you through some steps that can help your program prepare for the increased workload that we will see through the election and in the post-election period. It's been many years since we last had a full change in administration, and historically we've seen a demand and desire to increase the speed with which new administrations are able to get new senior officials into those senior positions. So I think we can expect that this next transition will be no different, and that we will have many pressures to get new presidential appointees on the field and into their positions as rapidly as possible, while of course observing all of the necessary protocols under the ethics regime, as well as security and the like. So what we want to do today is to think about some of the things that we can do right now to help prepare our programs. And we're going to start with some sort of evaluation and evaluation and measurement to determine where we are, how our programs are working at their current resource levels. And then we're going to look at some strategies that we can adopt as ethics officials to maximize the use of the resources we have available, to prepare to ask good questions where we need support from other areas of the office, and also, how we can use our processes and procedures to find efficiencies that can reduce the big spikes in workload that we expect. So what we'd like to do today is to take you through a brief slide deck and then share with you some resources that OGE and the Institute for Ethics in Government have prepared that can help you train new staff members, that can help you involve others in your program and your office in the ethics work that will be coming in the pre and post-election period. So if you give me just a second, I'd like to pull up the slides and then we can get started. Before we do that, I would like to remind everyone that we do have the capacity to ask questions throughout the presentation. And this presentation is really one that is about how we as a community are preparing ourselves. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask those. If you're on the Hangout, you can do so by typing them in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, and I'll see them and address them as they come in. Also, if you have ideas that you'd like to share, things that your program is doing to prepare, this can be as collaborative as we'd like to make it, and I'd be very happy to acknowledge and share some of the things that you guys are doing already to prepare for this increase in workload. For those of you on the phone, please feel free at any time to speak up. We'll be able to hear you and discuss any issues that your program might be facing in the area of resource preparation. So if you give me just a moment, I'll pull up the slides and we can get into the presentation. So the first step in preparing for any increase in workload or any event that is sort of unusual in the strains that it places on the resources that we have available is to figure out exactly where we are. How does our program look, and what are the magnitudes of the changes going to look like? And this provides us a number of important data points. One, it can help us plan our workload to avoid those spikes. We may be able to take steps to spread the workload around. It also puts us in a really good position if we do need to ask for help or additional resources from others in our organizations. If you can really quantify the difference in workload this year versus last and show some benchmarks, you can make a better case, and you can also make more specific requests. You can really be aware of what kind of resources and support you'll require. So what we have here is a timeline, and this timeline happens to be a slide. You could develop a similar one on a piece of paper. You could do that right now if you'd like. You could also create spreadsheets. Whatever planning tools that you use in your program are appropriate, but the important thing is to make sure that you engage in this activity, that you think about it before it happens. And you can see here, we're in June, and this is a theoretical agency, which may not resemble your agency. Is anticipating an increase in seeking post-employment and termination reports as people look for work outside of the government as the administration winds down. We can also see that we're going to have an increase in advice and counsel requests surrounding events leading up until the inauguration. If you were around last time, you probably received a lot of requests for events starting from the conventions and running all the way through January. So we have those reflected here. We have our 450 and 278 seasons, and then sort of an idea of what we think might be our workload as new entrant financial disclosure and initial ethics orientation ramps up. And something important to remember here is I think as ethics officials, we tend to focus on nominee financial disclosure as the big thing and sort of the only big change for us when we have a presidential transition. And while that is a huge increase in our workload, it's important to remember that we have other folks. We have other kinds of political appointees who are coming in who will be filing new entrant financial disclosures. We'll have new employees coming in. We need to provide them good initial ethics orientation. And we also have to remember that there will be an increase of folks leaving, and they will require post-employment counseling. We'll have to review their termination reports if they're 278 filers. They may need our help complying with the ethics rules during the seeking process. So we want to remember and sort of be mindful of all of the pieces that might change as we go through the transition process, as we approach the election and in the period after the election. So what we're sort of displaying here is what is going to be the work that's anomalous, that's an increase over previous years or over last year, and sort of map that against our known quantities. So you can see here we have reflected the confidential system or the season starting in the middle of February and the public filing season starting in May. And these timeframes in this current example provide us with a very large area of work in this area. We can expect to be very, very busy sort of from February through the early summer. That's sort of going to be peak load. And that's the place that if we need to ask for more resources, that's maybe a time that we would like to seek them. But there also might be some things that we can do to manage these peaks and to maybe smooth them out a little. So something I'd like you to consider as you do this exercise is think about which pieces of the ethics program do you, as the ethics official, have control over. So let's take an example of one such element. So here we have our annual ethics training. So usually when we start our annual ethics training campaign, we have a small amount of work as we encourage people to prepare for and get ready for the training as we prepare ourselves as instructors to deliver the training. Then we have a big push to get it done, and then there's always that follow-up with the stragglers. So the nice thing with the annual ethics training is that we have an opportunity to place that anywhere on the timeline that we'd like. So if we said that this was our 2016 annual ethics training, we've not begun that campaign yet. Looking at this timeline allows us to make a determination that sort of at the end of the public financial disclosure season this year, through the early fall, appears to be an area where we have sort of a lower amount of work. So that would be a really good place to put your annual ethics training campaign. So, you could start it as soon as possible. And this isn't the only element, but we share this as an example. If there's work that you can control, look for times that are not big peaks to carry out that work. We've also made another change to our timeline, and that's we've sort of stretched out the 2 financial disclosure seasons. You can sort of spread that work around a little bit if you can encourage your filers to get you the reports as soon as possible. So rather than having everyone bring the reports in exactly on the deadline, if you could begin that process a little earlier, that can help reduce some of that peak work. And additionally, you can use for the folks who are filing terms, you can also use the extensions to allow folks to file combination annual terms if that's appropriate for your agency. So this is another area where you can sort of think strategically once you see the timeline to try and move work around so that you're best prepared to deal with those big spikes in workload and those big spikes in sort of resource use. So this is sort of the starting point, and something I'd encourage you to do as you map out your next year or so is to look backwards. If you joined us last week for the discussion about self-assessments, and see how you were doing last year, and if there were any times where your program was particularly stressed, because those stressors are going to be maybe made even more stressful in the coming year. So if there are things you can do to remedy those or process efficiencies you can put in place to minimize them, now's a really good time to think about that. So our step one in the resource planning and management process here is to project out and think about what our workload is going to look like over the next 12 to 18 months. Look backwards and see how we did last year at this time to see if there are any weak spots or sort of stress points that we can direct our attention to in advance of the increase in workload. It also allows us to start to quantify any additional resource needs that we will have so that we can make good requests that are specific, that are measurable, that are time bound, because that will make it easier for people to meet those requests, and it also gives us a better case to make. If we can say during these months our workload is going to roughly double, this is how we did last year. If we want to keep the program on track, these are the resources we need. That's a case that you can only really make if you've done the analysis and done some projection forward. So now that we kind of understand where we are and where we're going, at least have a good sense of that, we can begin to talk about specific strategies for managing these periods of increased workload. And one of the key things that we're going to be touching on today as we walk through this process is the need to start early. It's one thing to identify now that next winter or next spring you're going to have a massive increase in workload and you're going to need more help. If you wait until then to try and get help, you'll find that the help available doesn't have the necessary skills and abilities to provide the best assistance. So if we're going to need assistance, we need to start thinking about that early so that we can get the people that will help us trained and ready to go, and we can think about what processes are going to help us manage those increases. So let's talk sort of generally about what we can do to manage these increased periods of activity and increased work. One thing generally we can do is look for places where we can reduce workload through process efficiencies. If you can identify steps that aren't necessary, if you can identify efficiencies in the process that allow you to accomplish more faster, that's great. And I think that's where we want to start is, so try and optimize our programs as much as possible so that we're getting absolute maximum value out of the resources that we currently have. We can stretch the time available to complete the work. So where we have control over the timing and the time frames of pieces of work, if we can stretch the time, we can reduce the amplitude of the big pushes. We can increase the efficiency of our employees. We can do this through training or by optimizing which employees that we're using for particular tasks. We can do this through triage and work management kind of tools. So that's another thing to think about. And then finally, we can increase available resources. If we really need more folks to help us get the work done, obviously that's a strategy that we can adopt. But in order to do that, we're going to be competing with others in our organization who are also going to be busy, who are also going to be receiving increases in workload. So it's important for us to have a very specific idea about which resources we need and what we need them to help us with specifically. So these are sort of the general strategies available to us. What I'd like to do now is sort of take you through how we can apply these to individual program elements to help us over the next 18 months. So making the case, if we determine at the end of the day that we need more resources, one of the things we want to do is to be as specific as possible. If you need administrative support, having a sense of exactly what tasks you'd like help with can be very helpful. Knowing exactly what time frame you will need that support can be very helpful. It's especially good if you can quantify the expected increase in work. So if you're looking at your timeline, you're saying we're going to have 50% more work next March than we did in this previous year, and we barely met our compliance targets last March. You can really make a case then about what that workload really looks like. You can also communicate when exactly you will need assistance. So if you know that the springtime is going to be a major area of concern for you, you can be sure to line up the help you need for the time you need it. And you could also emphasize that these challenges are not just challenges that the ethics program faces for its own sake, but that this is important work for the agency and for its continued effectiveness, and to get the new leadership in as quickly as possible. So let's talk about specific things we can do in the area of annual financial disclosure. And a lot of these focus on the area of sort of reducing work through efficiencies. And I'm sure a lot of you are already doing this. You're identifying common errors and communicating them to filers before filing. If you're not doing this, this is something really good to do. If you realize with your confidential filers a lot of folks aren't breaking out their 401ks or other retirement plans. Including that as a reminder or even a pre-filing checklist to help you get more accurate reports can save you a huge amount of time. I know when I was at an agency reviewing confidential reports, there were 3 or 4 questions that I asked again and again and again and again in order to get sufficiently complete reports so I could do a conflicts analysis. So if you can identify those things ahead of time and encourage your filers to make use of that pre-filing checklist to make sure that they have disclosed fully, you can save yourself some of that technical headache of back and forth. Additionally here, you can use your support staff to make sure that that compliance is taking place. So if it's possible to triage the reports as they come in and say, are these 2 or 3 things that we've identified as common problems, are any of those problems present on this report? And then they can go back before you even have to see the report if you know that there's the 401k is not broken out, for example. Another thing you could think about specifically in the area of 401ks is we often had filers that would have only diversified mutual funds in the account. So they'd report the account and then no underlying holdings, which is correct. That's not underreported. But because we didn't know that, we had to go back anyway. So in your communication to your filer where you have those kinds of errors, you could suggest a remedy to help you as an official. For example, if you have a 401k with only diversified funds, you either cannot report it, or if you'd like to report it, please just indicate it's just diversified mutual funds so we don't have to go back and forth. So if you can find ways to minimize that back and forth and make sure the reports are as clean as possible when they come to the ethics official who has to certify the report, that's a really good objective that can reduce your workload. And training new reviewers to resolve sort of common issues before the reports get to the certifying official can also be very, very helpful. Another interesting thing you might consider is triaging the reports. So if you have a number of reports that come in each year that indicate none, or have very few assets and little change from year to year, you might consider enlisting some more junior or maybe less experienced reviewers to take care of those very simple reports to free up the more experienced reviewers either to participate in the public financial disclosure system or to focus on the more complex confidential reports. You can also request the reports as soon as possible. We do have a filing deadline. We have filing deadlines that are indicated in the law and regulation. But there's nothing that prevents filers from completing their reports before those deadlines, as long as it's after the first of the year, so that the reports can reflect the entire reporting period. So once the reporting period is closed, you might see if you can work with some offices in your agency and get them to file on a staggered timeline. If you're in the general counsel's office and you have a lot of filers in your office, you could see if maybe you could get those in as soon as possible. So that you're spreading the work around rather than having a big deluge that comes on February 15th, which will just be, a few weeks after the inauguration and a very, very busy time for your program. And you could train your reviewers. And after we're done with the deck, I want to show you some of the resources that are available to you through the Institute for Ethics in Government YouTube channel to train reviewers. And we have some training opportunities at kind of all levels. We have some on-demand classes for supervisors who provide intermediate reviews. We have some education on the laws and regulations for people who do a full review and certification of the reports. We have some courses dedicated to sort of technical reporting issues. So you can really build a curriculum that's appropriate to the tasks that you want your reviewers to engage in. So if you have someone who needs to get through the technical stuff or someone who's operating as a supervisory reviewer, you could put together a few classes, maybe 2 or 3 hours worth of training that can empower them to carry out those activities. And then we'll sort of show you how you can find those in just a second. But the key here is that if you're going to provide the training, we have to start soon, because it does take people a while to get up to speed. People have other responsibilities. So if you know you're going to need help, the sooner you can identify the people who will be providing it and get them started on the training, the better. And finally here, sorting simple from complex reports to make best use of reviewers. So if you have new folks and you can give them the easier reports while saving the experience of your more experienced reviewers for those complex and difficult reports, that's another area where you can find some efficiencies. So there are a lot of things, and you guys probably have lots of other ideas about how to optimize your annual financial disclosure program. And as you go through this resource planning process, I'd encourage you to talk to your colleagues about how they do their jobs, how they process reports through the process, and see if you can identify places that can where you can save some time, where you can save steps, where you can save resources, or make better use of the resources that you have. So these are just some examples. Also in the area of annual ethics training and initial ethics orientation. This is another area where, as ethics officials, sort of beyond the baseline requirements of the regulation, we have a lot of flexibility. We have flexibility in the timing, we have flexibility in the methodology, and we can use that to smooth out some of the peaks in the increased workload that we expect over the next 18 months. So one thing we can do is get the 2016 annual training out of the way as soon as possible. If we know we're going to have a training challenge for ethics officials, and we're going to have an increase in advice and counsel and financial disclosure for outgoing officials, the sooner we can get started and get folks trained for 2016, the better. We can also think about what we want to do for 2017. If you have some downtime in August, or sort of a slow period, there's nothing that prevents you from getting your 2017 training plan in place. And if you have materials that you need to create, we can start thinking about that work now, because we know as soon as the first of the year comes that we're going to be very, very busy. So if we wait until that happens, that can be sort of another have to do that is sort of easy to get lost. Something else is you can consider alternative training methods for 2017. If you look at your resource picture and say, we really like to do small group training for all of our agency employees, and there are 2 of us in the shop, and we spend a huge amount of time on this, it's understandable that might not be feasible for you. And if that's the case, you can consider for groups of employees that are maybe at a lesser risk for potential conflicts or ethics concerns, using an alternative for the 2017 training cycle, so that you have the resources available to focus on maybe the initial ethics orientation of the new officials, if you find that to be a higher priority. So it's very possible to use sort of a risk-based analysis to determine where to place your resources. And it may be the case that you settle for mere compliance for certain audiences in order to get a quality product to other audiences that you perceive to be at a higher risk. So that's something to think about. And it's also something to think about now before you kind of get into the thick of it, because it's easier to make decisions when you have some time to do so. So yeah, the risk profiling is really good, especially when you're trying to balance the needs of incoming senior officials versus maybe more junior officials who have been with your agency for a very long time. Using that sort of risk model to prioritize those resources can be very helpful and also save you a lot of time. Advice and counsel is a little bit harder because we have less control here over when our requests for advice come in. We have less control over the types of questions, the complexity of questions that come in, because this is really a reactive function of the ethics program. But we can do some things to try and smooth out those peaks. One thing is, if we know there are routine kinds of requests that we get, particularly those kinds of requests we get during an election year, if you could train additional staff to handle some of the less complex ones, that can be a powerful resource. If you handle a lot of WAG requests and you have a pretty well defined process at your agency for handling those requests, you could ask some new officials to sort of go through our WAG massive open online course, or just get up to speed on the regulations, maybe shadow someone through the summer so that they can take on more of that work. You can also triage requests to leverage experienced officials. So, if there are simple questions that you're comfortable with more junior staff members handling, to be able to sort those from the complex ones and save the complex ones for the more experienced officials, you can make maximum use of the experience there. Also looking at processes to find efficiencies. If you have long and complex processes, or even simple processes for outside activities, post-employment counseling, widely attended gatherings, those kinds of routine advice that we provide, now is not a terrible time to look at those processes and see if there are places where you can save a step, where you can make things run a little more smoothly. If you can identify choke points that are slowing down the process, finding ways to sort of smooth those out and accelerate the process can be very useful. And for those of you who work in a general law shop, I know when I was in an agency, my colleagues were in the general law area, and in periods of peak demand, we would all often assist one another in our various program areas. So if you have some colleagues that are maybe in the personnel area or the information security or FOIA area, that could be trained up to handle some of the more routine requests, to the extent their time is available, that might be another strategy you could consider. And then finally, we need to anticipate periods of high volume and make sure we're staffed appropriately. Sometimes just by looking at the calendar going forward and asking staff to consider when they take their leave can be very helpful. If you have a very small shop and you have someone who's on extended leave who happens to schedule that during a critical time, that can be debilitating for a program. And it may be that with a little bit of foresight, you can sort of head those problems off. And likewise, if you need to bring in resources from other areas, making sure that they're there and available to you at the times you're most likely to need them can make that most effective for your program. So just to sort of summarize these general ideas, what we want to do is evaluate where we are. We want to plan and have a look at what we think is coming over the next 18 months. We want to train people to be able to handle those increases, look at our processes to make sure they're as efficient as they can be. And, finally, when we get to those big peaks in demand, when we get to those big peaks in workload, make sure that we're ready to execute and that we're really focused on the task at hand. And we can do that by being prepared and having sort of thought about it. So, I don't think any of this is earth-shattering or groundbreaking, but what's really important is to start early and, begin planning now. Make the time to prepare yourselves and your programs. I just point out that OGE recently proposed an amendment to 2638, and if that goes through as it's currently drafted, this will be a requirement that a year out, the DAO is required to assess the program strengths and weaknesses in order to make sure that they're prepared for a presidential transition. So I hope you guys are able to do this. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. It doesn't have to be a really formal exercise, but it's something, maybe dedicate some time at a staff meeting to think about and make sure that you're ready to go. And so I'd like to take a break here quickly, and then so I can pull up some resources that might be helpful to you as you start to train up additional staff or work with your current staff to give them more skills. So if you give me just a second, I'll bring up some of those resources. The first thing I'd like to share with you is our on-demand course directory, and you could be forgiven for not finding this. We apologize that Macs can be sometimes difficult to navigate, and it's not the friendliest to user-centered design. But on the distance learning page, there is a link to this on-demand course directory, which can be pretty helpful, especially if you have some sort of specific training needs, because it allows you to sort by course name, series, activity, citation, and topic. So if you're trying to get someone ready to be able to handle GIFs questions, you can sort all of our available online courses by topic and grab the appropriate GIFs courses and assign those out to staff who you're trying to train. You can do the same for financial disclosure. You can do the same for other areas of the program. So we try and provide you a taxonomy that allows you to easily find the courses that you really need. Another way that we try and do this is through the IEG YouTube page that you guys are on right now. You probably have often found the what's next area of the presentation, but we also have a number of other areas that can be useful to you. We have the Transition Readiness series, the Fundamental series, and the Advanced Practitioner series. But if you scroll down, we have put together some groups of financial disclosure topics, training tools and tips, as well as our collection of massive open online courses, which we've designed as tools for new folks, people who are new to certain kinds of work. So that's another resource that's available to you, and you might not think to use the recordings of these broadcasts as a staff training tool. We've also done some work internally at OGE looking at our available courses and trying to identify gaps in the available content for the ethics community getting ready for transition. And something we identified as a gap is that we don't have a massive open online course on seeking and negotiating for employment. We do have the post-employment massive open online course, but we don't have the seeking and negotiating. So we plan to add that massive open online course in the next month or so. So if you're going through our available resources and saying, I really need to get my folks up to speed on seeking and negotiating, help is on the way. And in the coming weeks, we will be offering that course. But we would like to remind you that we have our other massive open online courses for 450 review, 278 review, outside activities, widely attended gatherings, and post-employment. So those are very good courses. The way we use them here at OGE with new employees is we ask them to work through the classes at their own pace. And then we have periodic meetings where we discuss anything that they've learned, questions they have, and give them opportunities to practice. It's also a good idea if you have a large program to allow people to shadow or work with or be mentored by more experienced officials. So again, I think this is an area that we can really succeed and sort of save ourselves some time by thinking ahead, by using the available resources and identifying the challenges that we're going to face over the next 18 months. So now I'd like to open up for any questions you might have. If you are on the Hangout, you can ask a question or share an idea by typing in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. And those of you on the phone, I believe the line is open, so you're welcome to participate that way as well. And while we're waiting for folks to ask questions, I would like to also share with you another thing that we are working on here at OGE that you'll be seeing soon. We're creating a needs assessment for the ethics community for their training needs and professional development needs from the Institute for Ethics and Government over the next 18-month period, and then also over the subsequent fiscal years. So I think we're looking at fiscal years 2017, 2018, 2019. So if there are things that you need, there are things that we haven't offered that your program would benefit from, that'll be a really good opportunity to share those with us. And also, if there are things that we can support you in, if there are activities we can support you with or training that could help you as we work through the post-election year, you'll have an opportunity to share those needs with us as well. Because really, we do this for your benefit, and we want to make sure the things we're offering are responsive to real needs of your program. I'd also like to thank you for continuing to share your ideas in our post-course evaluations. You'll receive one of those today. So if you have ideas and you don't want to wait, that's another method you can get that information to us. All right, well, I'm not showing any questions on the Hangout. Again, if you think of something after we hang up and you need to get in touch, we're always here at OGE. You can contact us through your desk officer, and we'd be happy to assist you in any way that we can. I really appreciate you guys joining us today. I hope that this has been helpful and at least serves as a reminder to start thinking about some of your program needs and to use the available time that you have between now and the election to take steps to make this as painless as possible and to be as prepared as possible for the increase in workload. And if you come up with any really good ideas, please feel free to share those with us because we would like to share them with your colleagues throughout the community. So thank you again for joining us, and I'll see you next time.